Hello everybody. So I will continue now on the lecture about internal migration, and now we're going to talk about these measures of migration. I will give you some examples of how we can measure migration for different countries and contexts. So let's just go to slide 27 to start this portion of the lecture. So some difficulties in measuring migration are not encountered when we analyze fertility or mortality. Because for fertility and mortality, birth and deaths, they are registered at the time of occurrence. So we have birth certificates, death certificates that we can use using administrative data from the government to estimate fertility and mortality rates. However, in most countries, the residential move of a person is not registered at the time that it happens. I mean, there are some exceptions. For example, China and Scandinavian countries, they require people to register with the government when they move within the country. So since most countries don't have this sort of registration data as we have for fertility and mortality, it is necessary to rely on other types of data. And here in the US specifically, there are some different sources of data that we can estimate migration flows. So the American Community Survey, it's a survey that has been happening in the US every year around the country since 2005. And we have, at this moment, the American Community Survey available from 2005 to 2018. And it uses two items to estimate migration, people moving within the US and from other countries to the US. And these items, these variables, these questions, they were previously part of the decennial censuses up to 2000. So the censuses, the decennial censuses in the US or the demographic census until 2000, it had a long form, as I mentioned before in the course, that it had more questions asked to the people, and they were related to state of birth and place of residence 5 years prior to the date of the census. But then, after 2000, more specifically starting 2005, the American Community Survey asked also state of birth, but place of residence 1 year prior to the date of the American Community Survey. And I mean, I mentioned here the American Community Survey is available since 2005 for specific states, for specific areas in the country, in the US. The American Community Survey was implemented before 2005, but data that's reliable for the whole country, we usually take data starting in 2005 from the American Community Survey. There is some administrative data for the US that we can measure migration as well, such as data from the Internal Revenue Services, Internal Revenue Service based on tax returns data. So there are some demographers that recently used information from the IRS. So that's administrative data in order to see, to measure flows of Americans within the US using administrative data. But usually in the US, when most studies doing analysis of migration have been using more the ACS, but we might see in these coming years more studies done using the IRS data. And based on this sort of information here, we can generate migration status. So we can generate migration status using information of state of birth, place of residence at the enumeration time, the time that the census is being conducted or the American Community Survey is being conducted. So the census date or the American Community Survey date is April 1st of the year that the American Community Survey is being conducted. So the 2018 American Community Survey, the place of residence in April 1st, 2018 is an information that we can use to estimate migration status because we compare that place of residence at the time of the American Community Survey and we compare to the place of residence 1 year before the American Community Survey. And for censuses up to 2000, the information was place of residence 5 years before the census. So in 2000, people were asked where they lived in April 1st, 1995, and then we also know where they lived in April 1st, 2000. And in the American Community Survey, we have the information of place of residence at the time of the ACS and 1 year before ACS. So these are just some examples of categories that we can generate to categorize my people by migration status. So non-migrants or natives are those living in a given state and born in the same state. Lifetime migrants are those living in a given state but born somewhere else. And somewhere else could be another state in the US or in another country. But since here we are talking about internal migration, in this case, lifetime migrants are those living in a given state but born in another state within the US. And you see that the point of view here is in the area of destination. That's where people are living right now. In the point of view of the area of origin, so lifetime migrants would be those born in a given state but living in some other state at the time of the interview. And here again, I'm talking about migration from state to state as an example, but I'm also not considering migration from other countries to the US because in this chapter we are focusing on internal migration. So these are just examples of how we can generate this migration status variable. And recent migrants could be categorized as those people who moved into the state of current residence within the past 5 years, if we are using census data, or within the past 1 year, the American Community Survey. And the past 5 years, we have this information from the census only up to 2000. And then in the 2010 census, we have a shorter questionnaire, which is similar to the questionnaire that we are answering now for the 2020 census. So it does not have information about migration of residents 5 years before. In the 2010 census, in the 2020 census, we don't have that because after the 2000 census, we get information about place of previous residence 1 year before only from ACS. And as I mentioned before, we usually use this information starting in 2005. So we have to be careful when we analyze this migration data because people could move from and back a state several times between birth and the time of enumeration. So if we ask someone in which state were you born and which state and then we know the state where the person is living right now, maybe that person moved to several different areas, several different states in the US, and we don't have that information based on this data from censuses or from the American Community Survey. So the same caution applies to measure migration 5 years prior to the enumeration or even 1 year prior to the enumeration. Because the American Community Survey, let's say the 2018, asked people, where did you live exactly 1 year ago, April 1st, 2017? And we know where the person lives now, April 1st, 2018. But maybe between this time, April 1st, 2017 and 18, the person might have moved to other areas, but we lose that information because that's the nature of the variables that are being asked in the American Community Survey. So here we have some examples of migration rates and ratios that we can estimate. In migration rate, we divide the number of in-migrants in a specific area divided by the population in that area and multiply by 1,000. Out-migration rates, the number of out-migrants in a specific area divided by the population in that specific area, multiplied by 1,000. And in the demographic point of view, the correct formula here would be the out-migration rate. Because what is the out-migration rate? We have, for example, a state, let's say Texas. We are using the American Community Survey from 2018. So we know how many people left Texas between April 1st, 2017 in April 1st, 2018, and then we divide by the population in Texas in April 1st, 2017. Or to be even better would be the average of the population in Texas between April 1st, 2017 and April 1st, 2018. So the population, the middle of the period. And this population, the middle of the period, makes sense in the denominator to be the population of Texas, because that's the population that was exposed to the risk of getting out of Texas. And if we go again to Texas and we want to do immigration rate, the number of immigrants that move to Texas, and here we divide by the population in Texas, let's say the average of the population between April 1st, 2017 and April 1st, 2018. The problem is that this is the population, the destination. The population, the destination in Texas, in this example, is not exposed to the risk of coming to Texas because that population is already there. So in the demographic point of view, as we talked before in the course, the denominator of the formula should be the number of person years, the number of people that were exposed to the risk of experiencing the event that's being measured in the numerator. And the number of person years here, if you're talking about 1 year interval from 2017 to 2018, would be the number of people. We could have an approximation of that. The number of person years would be the population, the middle of the period, as I mentioned before. But the population that was exposed to the risk of coming to the numerator makes sense in the out-migration rate. People who were in Texas had the risk of getting out of Texas. And people who were already in Texas were not at risk of coming into Texas. But you see a lot of studies that do use this in-migration rate because they kind of like give an idea of how many immigrants are moving to a specific place, taking into account the size of that specific place. That can be a county, can be a state, and so on. And the net migration rate is the number of in-migrants minus the number of out-migrants divided by the population, multiplied by 1,000. The gross migration rate, as we talked before in the chapter, the number of in-migrants plus the number of out-migrants divided by the population times 1,000. And again, the denominator here in the population, the correct way would be to get the population in the area of origin, but a lot of studies, they just use the population in the area of the destination, the denominator, because it's easier, it simplifies the analysis. And the migration efficiency ratio, the MER, is pretty much the net migration rate divided by the gross migration rate. So in-migrants minus out-migrants divided by in-migrants plus out-migrants multiplied by 100. So the migration efficiency ratio is expressed in percentage, the other ones per 1,000. And so these terms here, I, O, and P, as I mentioned, are related to in-migrants moving into an area of destination during a specified time interval. In the ACS is 1 year, and in the census, up to 2000 census in the US, 5 years. O refers to the number of out-migrants, and P is the denominator of these rates and refers to the mid-year or the average size of the population at the resident area. And I said the mid-year because it kind of is an approximation to the person years that people lived in this area in that specific time interval. So in this case, in the example, using the 2018 American Community Survey, we get the population in a specific state using population April 1st, 2017, the population April 1st, 2018, and get the average of these two to be an approximation of the mid-year population and then approximation of person years to be used in the denominator of the formula. And just comparing these migration rates to mortality and fertility rates that we estimated before, the out-migration rate is analogous to the crew death rate because we are talking about losing population, losing people from specific areas, and that's related to death. in-migration rate is analogous to the crude birth rate because we are talking about gaining people in a specific area. So that's related to fertility. And the net migration rate is analogous to the rate of natural increase and decrease. So the rate of natural increase and decrease, which is the crude birth rate minus the crude death rate, is analogous exactly to the net migration rate, which equals the in-migration rate minus the out-migration rate. So the CBR minus the CDR is analogous to the IMR minus the OMR. And here is just an example of state-to-state domestic migration in the US using data from 2005 to from 2004 to 2005, and selecting these specific states here: California, Nevada, New York, and Texas. And these are the absolute numbers, the overall numbers of migration flows. So 448,718 people migrated to California between 2004 and 2005 from other states. So this is domestic migration. We're not talking about international migration. 717,121 people got out of California and moved to other states within the US between these 2 years. And the overall number, like if we add the number of in-migrants and out-migrants, we have the number of gross migrants, and the number of in-migrants minus out-migrants, we have the net migrants. So California lost people compared to the overall number of people that moved into California from other states. So California has a negative net migration, Nevada positive, New York negative, and Texas positive. And in terms of the in-migration rate, out-migration rate, gross migration rate, net migration rate, and migration efficiency ratio, these are the results for these states. So the in-migration rate for California was 12.9 per thousand, and the out-migration rate was 20.5 per thousand, consider the population, the denominator, the population of California. The in-migration rate plus the out-migration rate equals the gross migration rate, so it gives us an idea of the overall flow of people coming in and out of that state. The net migration rate in California is the in-migration rate minus the out-migration rate, so minus 7.7. And if we get the net migration rate divide by the gross migration rate and multiply by 100, we get the MER, the migration efficiency ratio, which is in this case minus 23%. So showing that California has been losing more people than gaining, and the same thing for New York. And so the efficiency here is negative in California and in New York, and positive in Nevada and Texas. So this is just an example to show how with like really basic information we can give some idea of the migration flows between states in the US, and you can imagine that we can do that taking into account all states in the US as well, using data from the same years. Okay, so that's what I had to talk about this topic on this internal migration chapter. Thank you very much.